All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION this hour. For the very first time ever in American history, an incoming president has been convicted in a criminal case. After months of back and forth, a court in New York has now sentenced Donald J. Trump. A New York judge has sentenced Donald Trump to unconditional discharge in the hush money case. The judge, however, has imposed no jail time or penalty on the U.S. president-elect. But the sentence does place the verdict of guilt on the president-elect's record, with the attendant labels of a convict and a felon. Now, for the first time in the entire trial, Donald Trump spoke after joining the hearing via a video conference. The Republican leader, who did not testify during the trial, said that he had been unfairly treated. However, ahead of the hearing, Donald Trump beckoned his supporters, issuing a quote-unquote emergency declaration. In an email to the supporters, he wrote, and I quote him here, "I'm being sentenced today just so they can label me a felon before I am sworn in. Do you think it's a coincidence that my inauguration is just a few days away?" Unquote. Now, according to a monitor for political spending, Trump's various fundraising arms provided over $20 million to cover the mounting legal fee borne by the president-elect and his allies across several trials. Now, before the hearing began, a sea of supporters and also anti-Trump protesters gathered outside of a New York court. Many anti-Trump demonstrators were seen holding posters calling him to be guilty and a con man, amongst other things, while his supporters, of course, do not believe that any of this is actually justice that is taking place. So as for the hush money case, Trump was convicted last year on 34 counts of falsifying business records. Now, Trump has denied all wrongdoing and has said that the case is nothing more than a political witch hunt, and he's pledged to continue with his appeals and legal challenges against this case. All right, now to give us more updates on this, we're joined by our correspondent Susan Tehrani, who's been tracking the story very closely for us from New York. Susan, we've spoken about the legal aspects of what this case, of course, means for Donald Trump. But considering politically how this plays out, Donald Trump, of course, has told his supporters that this was done deliberately, just to tarnish his image days before he was inaugurated. How is this going to be viewed by the supporters of Donald Trump? And does this now go on to divide the United States of America much more politically?
This is probably the last thing on any American's mind, honestly, at this point. First of all, there is just this fatigue about these trials related to President-elect Donald Trump. And then second of all, it was something, at least this hush money case and the mugshot and all of that, it played to the favor of President-elect Trump during the campaign trail. So he will continue to say what he says because he believes that. There are going to be legal experts who will question the legality of what Judge Juan Merchan did, considering the fact that they had to bypass the statute of limitations on the one hand, sort of Frankenstein this case together to bring it against back then the former president and now the president-elect on the other. But then there's going to be people here in New York, notably in New York State, that who brought this case forward, that they're going to say that, justice was served. This was extraordinary circumstances, and that's why that he is just going to get a label of convicted felon. But then the question remains, if his crimes were so serious, then why is it that, he wasn't really sentenced to anything except being sentenced? So you can see how there are discrepancies, how both sides can make their arguments very strongly. But as far as the American public go, they could care less. They are not divided on this issue. They all have their own opinions, and I think everyone sort of moved on. But it was something that Juan Merchan wanted to do. Gas prices, grocery prices, security at the border. These are issues that the American people are going to be very concerned about and see how Donald Trump is going to move forward. And, because of U.S. laws, being a convicted felon doesn't keep you out of the Oval Office.
Right, interesting. Thank you very much, Susan Tehrani, for joining us with those details there. And now to give us more perspective on how this, of course, plays out within the American political circles, we're being joined by Ms. Johanna LeBlanc, who's a national security law analyst and also a foreign relations expert. She's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, Ms. LeBlanc, this is a case that's going to be quoted anytime anyone speaks about President-elect Donald Trump. This will go down in American history as an unprecedented case where the United States of America effectively now has a convicted felon who will be walking into the White House as the President of the United States of America in a few days' time. What is your reading of this? Because Donald Trump is describing this as a witch hunt and he's called it a travesty of justice and a charade that is played out in front of the American public.
Thank you so much for having me on air. First and foremost, as you said, this is certainly unprecedented times here in America. We've never had a president-elect who was a convicted felon to hold the power at the Oval Office. So I think that ultimately this decision to sentence Mr. Trump, which was very important to the judge, in a sense, to make sure that he sends a message to the American people that no one is above the law, right? But also to New York has a statute that essentially says even when someone has been convicted of a crime, unless you are sentenced, you're not a convicted felon. So today is the day that the left-wing media and those who may not necessarily be supporters of Mr. Trump could actually legally call him a convict, sort of say. So I think that with this conviction, it's certainly going to cast doubt on American public system, American politics, because I think there are those who are going to use this to say, hey, your president is a convict. So when the United States wants to take certain decisions about other nations who may not be, behaving in the manner that they're supposed to, the conversation is going to be, you can't tell us anything about how we're supposed to govern ourselves because you yourself, you are a convict.
Interesting. That's going to be an interesting scenario that will play out. Thank you very much indeed, Ms. LeBlanc, for joining us from Washington, D.C. with our perspective there.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.